The smell of motor oil and old coffee filled Rodriguez Auto Repair as Tom wiped his hands on the same blue coveralls he'd worn for the past 8 years. The clock on the wall showed 5:30 p.m., and outside the small garage windows, the November sky was already turning dark. Thanksgiving evening was here, and Tom was finally ready to head home. He walked over to his toolbox and started putting away his wrenches, thinking about the turkey that would be waiting for him. His wife Maria had been cooking since dawn, and the house would smell like heaven when he walked through the door. Their 2 little girls had been asking all week when Daddy would be home for dinner. Tonight was special, not just because of Thanksgiving, but because it was the first holiday in months where Tom wouldn't have to work late. The auto repair shop had been struggling lately. Business was slow, and Tom often found himself working until 9 or 10 at night just to make ends meet. But today was different. Today was about family. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door and was about to turn off the lights when his phone buzzed. A text from Maria popped up on the screen. "Don't forget dinner starts at 6. Your mom is already here asking where you are. The girls made you a special place card." Tom smiled and typed back quickly. "Leaving now. Be there in 10 minutes. He was reaching for the light switch when he heard it. 3 loud knocks on the metal garage door. Tom paused. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe someone was trying to get his attention about something in the parking lot. He waited a moment, but the knocking came again, this time more urgent. Tom sighed and walked over to the small window next to the door. Outside, he could see a woman standing in the cold, her breath making small clouds in the air. She was well dressed, wearing what looked like an expensive coat, but her face showed pure panic. Behind her stood 2 teenagers, both looking cold and worried. Against his better judgment, Tom unlocked the door and opened it halfway. The cold November air hit his face immediately. "Excuse me?" the woman said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but are you the mechanic? We saw your sign and we're really desperate for help." Tom looked past her to the road, where a large black SUV sat on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. Even from a distance, he could see steam rising from under the hood. "Ma'am, I'm actually closed for the evening," Tom said, glancing at his phone. It was now 5:35. "It's Thanksgiving and my family is waiting for me at home. There's another shop, about 15 miles down the highway, that might be open." The woman's face fell. "We already tried calling them. They're closed too. We've been calling everyone we can find, but it's the holiday." She gestured toward the teenagers behind her. "These are my kids, and we're trying to get to my mother's house. She's been alone all day waiting for us." One of the teenagers, a boy, who looked about 17, stepped forward. "Sir, we wouldn't ask if we weren't really stuck. Our phone says the nearest hotel is 50 miles away, and with our car broken down." He trailed off, but Tom could see the worry in his eyes. Tom felt his phone buzz again. Another text from Maria. "Tom, where are you? Everyone's asking about you." He looked at the family standing in front of him. The woman's coat might have been expensive, but her face showed the same kind of stress Tom had seen in his own mirror. Plenty of times when money was tight and problems seemed impossible to solve. The kids looked cold and tired, and he could imagine his own daughters in their situation. "What seems to be wrong with your car?" Tom heard himself asking, even as part of his mind was screaming that he should be getting in his truck and driving home. "It just started making this loud noise. About 10 minutes ago," the woman explained. "Then all this steam came out from under the hood and the temperature gauge went all the way up. We pulled over right away because we didn't want to make it worse." Tom nodded. It sounded like a classic overheating problem, probably a busted radiator hose or maybe a leak in the cooling system. On a normal day, it would be an easy fix, but today wasn't a normal day. Today was Thanksgiving, and every parts store in a 50-mile radius would be closed. "Let me take a quick look," Tom said, surprising himself. "Maybe it's something simple." The woman's face lit up with relief. "Thank you so much. I'm Mrs. Johnson, and these are my kids, David and Lisa." Tom nodded and grabbed his flashlight from the workbench. "I'm Tom. Let's see what we're dealing with." As they walked toward the SUV, Tom's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Maria. He let it go to voicemail, knowing she was probably wondering why he wasn't home yet. The SUV was a nice one, probably worth more than Tom made in 6 months. But right now, it was just another broken car on the side of the road. Tom popped the hood and shined his flashlight into the engine compartment. Sure enough, there was coolant everywhere, and he could see where the upper radiator hose had split. "Well, I found your problem," Tom said, pointing to the damaged hose. "This here is your radiator hose, and it's got a pretty good tear in it. That's why you were losing coolant and overheating." Mrs. Johnson looked at the mess of wires and metal under the hood, like it was written in a foreign language. "Is it something you can fix?" Tom stood up and wiped his hands on his coveralls. This was the moment of truth. He could tell them what they needed and send them on their way, or he could do what his father had taught him, help people when they need it most. "The fix itself isn't complicated," Tom explained. "I just need to replace this hose and refill your coolant. Problem is, it's Thanksgiving evening and every parts store is closed. I'd have to see if I can find the part somewhere else." David, the teenage boy, looked at his phone. "How long do you think it would take?" Tom thought about it. He knew old Pete kept a junkyard about 20 minutes away, and Pete sometimes had newer parts from insurance totals. If he was lucky, he might find what he needed there, but it would mean at least 2 hours of work, maybe 3. His phone rang again. "Maria." "Excuse me for just a second," Tom said, stepping away from the family. "Tom, where are you?" Maria's voice came through the phone, and he could hear the sounds of family dinner in the background. Laughter, kids playing, the clatter of dishes. "I'm still at the shop, honey. There's a family here with car trouble, and they're really stuck." There was a pause. "Tom, it's Thanksgiving. Your mother drove 2 hours to be here. The girls have been waiting for you all day." Tom looked back at the Johnson family. Mrs. Johnson was hugging her arms around herself to stay warm, and the kids were sharing David's jacket. "I know, Maria. I know. But they don't have anywhere else to go, and every other shop is closed. If I don't help them, they'll be stuck here all night." Another pause. Then Maria's voice, softer now. "How long?" "Maybe 2 hours. 3 at most." He could hear Maria sigh. "Okay, but Tom, please hurry. We'll keep your plate warm." Tom hung up and walked back to the family. Mrs. Johnson looked at him hopefully. "All right," Tom said, making his decision. "Let me see what I can do." Tom looked at the broken radiator hose one more time, then at the Johnson family waiting hopefully beside their disabled SUV. The cold November wind was picking up, and he could see Lisa shivering despite wearing her brother's jacket over her own coat. "Let me get you folks inside where it's warm while I figure this out," Tom said, unlocking the garage door and hitting the button to raise it. The fluorescent lights flickered on, casting a bright glow over his small but tidy workspace. Mrs. Johnson looked around the garage with genuine interest. "This is a nice setup you have here. How long have you been running this place?" "About 12 years now," Tom replied, grabbing 3 folding chairs from behind his workbench. "My dad started it back in 1985. I took over when he passed." He set up the chairs near his small office area where an old coffee pot sat on a table, next to a stack of automotive magazines. "I'm sorry for your loss," Mrs. Johnson said softly, settling into one of the chairs while her kids looked around at the tools and equipment. Tom nodded his thanks and poured the last of the day's coffee into 3 paper cups. "It's not fresh, but it's warm," he said, handing them out. "Now let me make some calls and see if I can track down that part you need." He pulled out his phone and started dialing. The first number went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Jerry's Auto Parts. We're closed for Thanksgiving and will reopen Friday morning at 8 a.m. The second call was the same story, then the third. Tom tried 4 different parts stores within a 30-mile radius, but they were all closed for the holiday. Each voicemail message felt like another door slamming shut. David, the teenage boy, watched Tom's expression grow more frustrated with each call. "Is it looking bad?" he asked quietly. "Well, I'll be honest with you," Tom said, putting his phone down. "Every parts store I know is closed until Friday, but I'm not giving up yet. There's one more place I can try." Tom thought about old Pete's junkyard. Pete Morrison had been running Morrison's used auto parts for 40 years. and his yard was filled with cars from every decade. If anyone would have a radiator hose that might work, it would be Pete. The problem was that Pete didn't exactly keep regular business hours, especially on holidays. "Where's that?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "There's a junkyard about 20 minutes from here. The owner is a friend of my dad's, and he's got parts from just about every car ever made. The thing is, he doesn't have a phone, and I'm not even sure he'll be there tonight." Lisa looked up from the magazine she'd been flipping through. "A junkyard? That sounds kind of scary." Tom chuckled. "Pete's junkyard isn't scary. It's actually pretty amazing if you're into cars. He's got vehicles going back to the 1950s, all organized in neat rows. Pete knows where every single part is in that place." "But you don't know if he's there tonight?" David asked. "That's right. Pete lives in a little house right on the property, but he might be at his daughter's for Thanksgiving dinner. Only one way to find out, though." Tom grabbed his jacket and truck keys. "I'm going to drive over there and see if I can find what we need. You folks make yourselves comfortable. There's a small TV in the office if you want to watch something. And help yourselves to any snacks in that vending machine. Just give it a good kick if your selection gets stuck." Mrs. Johnson stood up. "You don't have to do all this for us. We're already keeping you from your family dinner." Tom paused at the door. "Ma'am, my dad always told me that helping folks isn't something you do when it's convenient. It's something you do when it's needed. Besides, my wife will keep my dinner warm. Your mother is probably worried sick about you." As Tom drove through the dark country roads toward Pete's place, his phone rang again. Maria's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, honey," he answered. "Tom, your sister just asked me when you're coming home. What should I tell everyone?" Tom could hear the sounds of family celebration in the background, his daughters laughing, someone playing guitar, the warm buzz of conversation that made Thanksgiving special. "Tell them I'm trying to help a family get to their grandmother's house for dinner. I found the problem with their car, but I need to track down a part." "On Thanksgiving night? Where are you going to find car parts?" "I'm heading to Pete's junkyard. Remember Pete Morrison? Dad's old friend?" Maria was quiet for a moment. "Tom, what if Pete isn't there? What if you can't find the part? You could be out there all night." Tom turned into the gravel driveway that led to Pete's junkyard. In the distance, he could see a warm light glowing in the window of Pete's small house. "I see a light on. I think Pete's home." "Okay, but promise me you won't stay out there all night. If you can't find what you need in the next hour or two, just come home. That family will have to find another way." "I promise," Tom said, though he wasn't sure he meant it. Something about Mrs. Johnson and her kids reminded him of his own family, the way they stuck together, the way they worried about their grandmother being alone. Tom parked his truck and walked up to Pete's front door. Before he could knock, the door opened and Pete Morrison appeared, all 6 feet and 4 inches of him, wearing a Thanksgiving sweater that looked like it was knitted in 1975. "Tom Rodriguez," Pete's voice boomed across the quiet evening. "What brings you out here on Thanksgiving night? Don't tell me you've got car trouble." "Hey, Pete. Actually, I've got a customer with a busted radiator hose and every parts store in 3 counties is closed. I was hoping maybe you'd have something that might work." Pete scratched his gray beard. "What kind of vehicle we talking?" "About late model SUV, big V8 engine, upper radiator hose split wide open." Pete thought for a moment. "I might have something. Got a couple of SUVs from insurance totals that came in last month. Come on, let's take a look." Pete grabbed a heavy flashlight from his kitchen table and led Tom into the junkyard. Row after row of vehicles stretched out into the darkness, organized by make and model with the precision of a library catalog. "You know, Tom, your dad would be proud of what you're doing tonight," Pete said as they walked between the cars. "I remember one Christmas Eve must have been 15 years ago now. Your dad left Christmas dinner to help a trucker who broke down on the interstate. Spent 4 hours in the snow getting that man's rig running so he could get home to his family." Tom had never heard that story before. "Dad never told me about that." "Your dad didn't talk about things like that. He just did them." Pete stopped in front of a damaged SUV and popped the hood. "But I'll tell you what he told me that night. He said helping people isn't about getting credit or recognition. It's about being the kind of person who shows up when someone needs you. They spent the next hour going through 3 different vehicles, testing hoses and checking sizes. Finally, in a SUV that had been rear-ended but had a perfect engine, they found what they needed. "This should do the trick," Pete said, holding up the radiator hose. "Looks like it's in perfect condition, too." Tom reached for his wallet, but Pete waved him away. "On the house, Tom. It's Thanksgiving, and you're doing a good deed. Besides, your dad helped me out plenty of times over the years." As they walked back toward Tom's truck, Pete clapped him on the shoulder. "That family you're helping, they're lucky they broke down in front of the right garage." Tom drove back to his shop with the replacement part, thinking about his father and wondering if he was making the right choice. His phone showed 2 missed calls from Maria and a text message. "Girls are asking when Daddy's coming home, hurry." When he pulled up to the garage, he could see the Johnson family through the windows, still sitting where he'd left them. Mrs. Johnson was reading one of his automotive magazines while David and Lisa were watching something on the small TV in his office. Tom walked in holding the radiator hose like a trophy. "Good news, folks. I found what we need." Tom held up the radiator hose with a smile that reached his tired eyes. "This should get you back on the road," he announced to the Johnson family, who had been waiting patiently in his small office area. Mrs. Johnson jumped up from her chair, relief washing over her face. "Oh, thank goodness, you actually found one?" "Pete Morrison came through for us," Tom said, walking over to his workbench to gather his tools. "Now I just need to install it and get your coolant system filled back up. Should take me about 45 minutes, maybe an hour." David looked up from the TV where he'd been watching an old football game. "Can we help with anything? I feel bad just sitting here while you do all the work." Tom appreciated the offer, but shook his head. "I've got it covered, son. But I appreciate you asking." He paused and looked at the family. "You know what, though? It might get a little loud out there with the engine running and my air tools. You're welcome to stay in here where it's comfortable." Lisa, who had been quietly looking through Tom's collection of automotive magazines, spoke up. "Actually, if it's okay, I'd kind of like to watch. I've never seen anyone fix a car before." "You sure?" Tom asked, surprised. "It's not very exciting. Just a lot of reaching around under the hood and getting my hands dirty." "I'm sure," Lisa said, standing up. "My friends always say car stuff is boring, but I think it's kind of cool how you can figure out what's wrong and then fix it." Mrs. Johnson smiled at her daughter. "Lisa's always been curious about how things work. When she was little, she used to take apart every toy she could get her hands on." Tom chuckled. "Well, come on then. Let me show you what we're dealing with." As they walked over to the SUV, Tom explained what he was going to do. "See, your engine needs coolant to keep from overheating, kind of like how your body needs water. The coolant flows through these hoses from the engine to the radiator and back again. When one of these hoses breaks, the coolant leaks out, and the engine gets too hot." David joined them, interested despite himself. "So it's like the hoses are blood vessels?" "That's actually a pretty good comparison," Tom said, impressed. "The engine is like the heart, pumping the coolant through the system. The radiator is like your lungs, cooling everything down." Tom opened his toolbox and pulled out his socket wrench set. "Now the trick is getting the old hose off without making a bigger mess than we already have." As Tom worked, loosening the clamps that held the damaged hose in place, Mrs. Johnson found herself really looking at the garage for the first time. It was small but incredibly organized. Every tool had its place, and despite being an automotive shop, it was surprisingly clean. "You keep a really nice shop here," she said. "How long did you say you've been doing this?" 12 years since I took over from my dad," Tom replied, working a stubborn clamp loose. "But I've been around cars my whole life. Started helping my dad when I was about David's age." "Did you always want to be a mechanic?" David asked. Tom paused his work and thought about the question. "You know, when I was in high school, I actually wanted to be an engineer. Had dreams of designing cars instead of just fixing them." "What happened?" Lisa asked. "Life happened," Tom said simply. "My dad got sick during my senior year and someone needed to help keep the business running. My mom was working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, and this place was all we had." Mrs. Johnson watched Tom's face as he spoke. There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance. Do you ever regret not pursuing engineering? Tom pulled the old hose free and held it up, examining the tear. You know, I used to. For a long time. I thought I was stuck, like I'd given up my dreams for everyone else's needs. He walked over to his workbench and picked up the replacement hose. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was wrong. How do you mean? David asked, genuinely curious. Well, think about what we're doing right now, Tom said, fitting the new hose into place. You folks were stuck, worried about your grandmother, probably feeling pretty helpless. In an hour, you'll be back on the road heading to your family dinner. That's engineering too, in a way. I'm solving problems, making things work better. Lisa nodded slowly. I never thought about it like that. Plus, Tom continued, tightening the clamps on the new hose, I get to meet all kinds of people. Farmers, teachers, nurses, business folks. Everyone needs their car to work, and everyone's got a story. Mrs. Johnson found herself studying Tom's face as he worked. What kind of stories? Tom smiled as he reached for his coolant reservoir. Oh, all kinds. Just last month I had a teacher come in with a car that wouldn't start. Turns out she'd been driving to school on fumes because she was spending her own money on supplies for her classroom. Didn't have enough left over for regular maintenance. What did you do? Lisa asked. Fixed her car and didn't charge her for the labor. Told her to pay me when she could. Tom paused. She brought me homemade cookies a few weeks later and said her kids had written thank you cards for the nice mechanic who helped their teacher. David shook his head. Man, that's really cool of you. It's just what you do, Tom said, starting to refill the cooling system. We're all in this together, you know? Sometimes you're the one who needs help. Sometimes you're the one who can give it. Mrs. Johnson watched Tom work with steady, confident hands. Your wife must be proud of the work you do. Tom's expression grew a little sad. Maria worries more than she's proud, I think. Business has been tough lately. Lots of newer shops opening up with fancy equipment and marketing budgets. Sometimes she wonders if we should just sell this place and move somewhere with more opportunities. But you don't want to? Lisa asked. This shop is more than just a business to me, Tom explained, checking the coolant level. My dad built something here. Not just a way to make money, but a place where people could come when they needed help, where they'd be treated fairly and charged honestly. He closed the hood and wiped his hands on a rag. When my dad passed, the banker suggested I sell the property, said I could make more money doing something else, but you know what? Money isn't everything. David looked around the garage with new appreciation. This place has history. It does, Tom agreed. And every person I help here, every problem I solve, that becomes part of the history too. Mrs. Johnson felt something stirring in her chest as she listened to Tom talk. Here was a man who had given up his own dreams to serve his community, who missed family dinners to help strangers, who charged fairly, even when business was slow. In her world, she rarely met people like Tom. Tom, she said quietly, can I ask you something personal? Sure. If you could change anything about your situation, what would it be? Tom thought for a moment as he put his tools away. Honestly, I'd love to expand this place. Maybe add a second bay, get some newer diagnostic equipment. And I've always dreamed of starting a program to teach kids about automotive repair. So many young people don't know basic car maintenance anymore. Why haven't you? David asked. Tom gave him a rueful smile. Same reason most dreams don't happen, I guess. Money. Equipment like that costs more than I make in a year, and banks aren't exactly lining up to loan money to small auto shops these days. Mrs. Johnson and her children exchanged glances, but Tom didn't notice. He was focused on starting up the SUV to test his repair. The engine turned over smoothly, and Tom let it run for several minutes, checking for leaks and watching the temperature gauge. Everything looked perfect. Well, folks, he said, turning off the engine, you're all set. No more overheating, and you should make it to your grandmother's house just fine. Tom wiped his hands on his coveralls one final time and smiled at the Johnson family. That should do it. Your SUV is running perfectly now, and the temperature gauge is right where it should be. Mrs. Johnson looked relieved, but also a little sad that their time in the garage was coming to an end. Tom, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done tonight. You gave up your Thanksgiving dinner for complete strangers. Don't mention it, Tom said, walking over to his small desk to write up a simple receipt. Let me just figure out what I owe you for parts and labor. As Tom sat down and pulled out his calculator, Mrs. Johnson reached into her purse to get her wallet. But as she opened it, something unexpected happened. A business card slipped out and fluttered to the floor. David quickly bent down to pick it up. As he handed it back to his mother, Tom couldn't help but notice the elegant logo and text on the card. His eyes widened slightly as he read it. Johnson Foundation, he read aloud, then looked up at Mrs. Johnson with surprise. Foundation? Mrs. Johnson paused, holding the business card in her hand. She had been hoping to keep their identity quiet, to just be a normal family receiving help from a kind stranger. But now that secret was out. Yes, she said quietly. That's our family foundation. Tom set down his calculator and looked at the three of them with new curiosity. What kind of foundation? Lisa and David exchanged glances with their mother. They had enjoyed being treated like regular people for the past few hours, not as the children of wealthy philanthropists. We focus on education and small business support, Mrs. Johnson explained carefully, helping people who want to improve their lives but need a little assistance to get there. Tom nodded politely, but he was still processing this information. That sounds like important work. David pulled out his phone. Mom, should I show him? Mrs. Johnson hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I suppose there's no point in hiding it now. David walked over to Tom and held out his phone. On the screen was a local news article from just 2 months earlier. The headline read, Local Foundation awards $2 million in small business grants. Tom's jaw dropped as he saw the photo accompanying the article. There was Mrs. Johnson shaking hands with the mayor with a large check in the background. David and Lisa stood beside her, smiling for the cameras. Wait a minute, Tom said, looking back and forth between the phone and Mrs. Johnson. You're that Johnson Foundation? The one that's been in all the local papers? Mrs. Johnson nodded, looking almost embarrassed. We prefer to keep a low profile when we're not doing official foundation business. Tom scrolled through the article, reading quickly. The Johnson Foundation had apparently been helping local businesses for over 10 years, providing grants and low-interest loans to entrepreneurs who couldn't get traditional bank financing. This says you've helped over 200 small businesses in the county, Tom said, his voice filled with amazement. 237, actually, Lisa said proudly. We keep track of every single one. Tom looked up from the phone, his mind racing. And you focus on what kind of businesses? All kinds, David explained. Restaurants, retail stores, service businesses. Mom always says the backbone of any community is its small businesses. Mrs. Johnson watched Tom's expression carefully. We particularly like to help businesses that serve their communities in meaningful ways, places where the owners really care about their customers and neighbors. Tom handed the phone back to David, feeling slightly overwhelmed. I can't believe I've been talking to you all evening about my little shop and my problems, and you're out there changing people's lives with millions of dollars. Tom, Mrs. Johnson said firmly, what you've done for us tonight is just as important as anything our foundation does. Maybe more important. How do you figure that? Tom asked, genuinely confused. Lisa stepped forward. Because you didn't help us because you had to, or because it was your job, or because someone was paying you to do it. You helped us because it was the right thing to do. David nodded in agreement. And you didn't even know who we were. For all you knew, we were just some random family with car trouble. Mrs. Johnson walked closer to Tom. Do you want to know something? In my line of work, I meet a lot of people who want our help. Most of them have prepared presentations, business plans, references. They're trying to impress us, to convince us they deserve our support. Tom listened intently, not sure where this was going. But tonight, Mrs. Johnson continued, I met someone who wasn't trying to impress anyone. Someone who just saw people in need and decided to help even though it cost him his own family time. Tom felt his cheeks getting warm. I just did what anyone would do. No, Tom, Mrs. Johnson said gently. You didn't. Most people would have told us to call a tow truck or find a hotel. Most people would have protected their own evening with their family. David pulled up another article on his phone. Tom, look at this. This is from last year when our foundation was featured in the State Business Journal. Tom looked at the new article. This one showed the scope of the Johnson Foundation's work across the entire state. They had apparently provided over $50 million in grants and loans over the past decade. $50 million, Tom whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. And here I am complaining about needing money for new equipment. Mrs. Johnson smiled. Tom, can I tell you something about our foundation? Sure. Every year we get hundreds of applications from businesses asking for help. Most of them are perfectly worthy causes. But do you know what we look for when we're deciding who to support? Tom shook his head. We look for people who already demonstrate the values we want to promote, people who treat their customers fairly, who contribute to their communities, who would help others even when there's nothing in it for them. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. Mom always says we don't create good business owners. We just find them and help them grow. Tom was starting to understand where this conversation was heading, but he hardly dared to believe it. Tom, Mrs. Johnson said, in the past 3 hours, you've shown us exactly the kind of character we look for. You've told us about helping a teacher who couldn't afford car repairs. You've talked about your dreams of teaching young people. You've demonstrated integrity, compassion, and dedication to your community. David grinned. Plus, you literally gave up Thanksgiving dinner to help complete strangers. Tom looked at the three of them, his heart beginning to race. What are you saying? Mrs. Johnson reached into her purse and pulled out a different business card. This one had her direct contact information on it. I'm saying that when our foundation opens applications for our next round of small business grants in January, I very much hope you'll consider applying. Tom stared at the business card in his hand. You really think I'd have a chance? Tom, Mrs. Johnson said with a warm smile, I think you'd be exactly the kind of applicant we dream about finding. Lisa clapped her hands together excitedly. This is so cool. Tom, you could get that diagnostic equipment you were talking about. And maybe expand the shop, David added. Create that training program for kids. Tom felt his eyes getting watery. He had spent the evening thinking he was just helping a stranded family, never imagining that this chance encounter could change everything. I don't know what to say, Tom managed. Say you'll apply, Mrs. Johnson said simply. Say you'll let us help you the same way you helped us tonight. Tom looked around his small garage, seeing it now not as a limitation but as a foundation for something bigger. Something that could serve his community even better. I'll apply, he said, his voice strong with determination. I'll definitely apply. Mrs. Johnson smiled and extended her hand for a handshake. Then I think this has turned out to be a very good Thanksgiving for all of us. 2 weeks had passed since that memorable Thanksgiving evening, and Tom was still trying to process everything that had happened. He had submitted his application to the Johnson Foundation the very next Monday, spending hours carefully writing out his plans for expanding the shop and creating a youth training program. Every morning he checked his mailbox hoping for some kind of response, but he tried not to get his hopes up too high. After all, Mrs. Johnson had mentioned they received hundreds of applications. Just because they had met didn't guarantee anything. It was a cold Tuesday morning when Tom heard a car pull up outside the garage. He looked up from the engine he was working on and was surprised to see David Johnson getting out of a familiar SUV. But this time, he wasn't alone. A man with a professional camera was with him, along with a woman carrying what looked like recording equipment. Tom wiped his hands on his coveralls and walked outside, confused but curious. Hey, David, Tom called out. What brings you back? To my little corner of the world? David grinned and walked over with his companions. Tom, I'd like you to meet Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7 News. And this is her cameraman, Mike. Rebecca stepped forward with a friendly smile and extended her hand. Mr. Rodriguez, it's such a pleasure to meet you. David and his family have told us quite a story about what happened here on Thanksgiving night. Tom shook her hand, still puzzled. I'm not sure I understand. What kind of story? The kind of story that reminds people why community matters, Rebecca explained. David's family nominated you for our monthly Hometown Hero feature. They want to share your story with our viewers. Tom felt his face flush. Oh, I don't know about that. I just helped some folks with car trouble. That's nothing special. Mike, the cameraman, was already setting up his equipment. Actually, Mr. Rodriguez, according to what we've been told, you did quite a bit more than that. David pulled out his phone and showed Tom a video that had been recorded. This is my mom talking to the news station about what happened that night. Tom watched the screen as Mrs. Johnson spoke directly to the camera. This young man gave up his Thanksgiving dinner with his family to help complete strangers. He spent hours tracking down parts, working in the cold, and never once complained or asked for anything extra. In a world where people often pass by, others in need, Tom Rodriguez stopped and made a difference. Tom handed the phone back, feeling overwhelmed. She didn't need to do this. Actually, Rebecca said, setting up for the interview, Mrs. Johnson insisted on it. She said your story needed to be told because it represents the best of what people can be for each other. As Mike finished setting up his camera, Tom noticed another vehicle pulling into his parking lot. This time it was a sleek black sedan, and when the driver got out, Tom's heart nearly stopped. It was Mrs. Johnson herself, but she wasn't alone. She was carrying an official-looking folder and had a serious expression on her face that made Tom's stomach drop. Mrs. Johnson, Tom said, walking over to meet her. I wasn't expecting to see you today. She smiled, but Tom could tell she was trying to contain some kind of excitement. Tom, I have some news about your grant application. David immediately stopped talking to the news crew and rushed over. Mom, you said you weren't going to tell him until after the interview. Mrs. Johnson laughed. I couldn't wait. Besides, this news is too good to keep secret any longer. Tom felt his mouth go dry. What kind of news? Mrs. Johnson opened the folder in her hands and pulled out an official-looking document. Tom, the Johnson Foundation Board met yesterday to review the applications for our winter grant cycle. Tom held his breath, preparing himself for disappointment. He had applied for $75,000 to upgrade his equipment and start the youth training program, knowing it was probably too much to hope for. Tom, Mrs. Johnson continued, in 12 years of running this foundation, I have never seen the board vote unanimously on any application. Tom's heart sank. A unanimous vote probably meant they had all agreed his request was too ambitious. Until yesterday, Mrs. Johnson said, her smile growing wider. Yesterday, every single board member voted to approve your application in full. Tom stared at her, not sure he had heard correctly. In full? You mean? I mean the Johnson Foundation is awarding you a $75,000 grant to expand Rodriguez Auto Repair and create the youth automotive training program you proposed. For a moment, Tom couldn't speak. He just stood there in his small parking lot, looking at the official grant approval letter that Mrs. Johnson was holding out to him. David was grinning from ear to ear. Tom, do you know what this means? Tom finally found his voice. It means I can buy that diagnostic computer I've been dreaming about for 5 years. It means I can hire another mechanic and maybe add a second service bay. It means more than that, Mrs. Johnson said gently. It means you can start teaching young people skills that will help them for the rest of their lives. Rebecca had been quietly filming this entire exchange, and now she stepped forward with her microphone. Tom, how does it feel to know that your simple act of kindness on Thanksgiving night has led to this opportunity? Tom looked around at all the faces watching him. David's excited expression, Mrs. Johnson's proud smile, the news crew capturing every moment. 2 weeks ago, he had been worried about keeping his small shop running. Now he was looking at the chance to transform not just his business, but his entire community. It feels like a dream, Tom said honestly. But more than that, it feels like responsibility. Mrs. Johnson and her family are trusting me with this opportunity, and I don't want to let them down. What's the first thing you're going to do with the grant money? Rebecca asked. Tom thought for a moment. Well, I need to call my wife first and tell her the news. She's been worrying about this business for years, and she deserves to know that things are about to get a lot better. Mrs. Johnson laughed. I think Maria is going to be very happy. After that, Tom continued, I want to visit the local high school and talk to the principal about starting an after-school automotive program. I've been thinking about this for weeks now, and I have so many ideas. David nodded enthusiastically. That's going to be so cool. Kids today don't get enough hands-on learning opportunities. Tom looked at Mrs. Johnson with genuine gratitude. 2 weeks ago you were just a family with car trouble. I never could have imagined that helping you would lead to all this. Tom, Mrs. Johnson said, that's exactly why it led to this. You helped us without knowing who we were or what we might be able to do for you. You helped us simply because it was the right thing to do. Rebecca turned to address the camera directly, and that's what makes Tom Rodriguez a true hometown hero. In a world where people often ask what's in it for me, Tom asked how can I help? And sometimes, when you put kindness first, amazing things happen. As the news crew packed up their equipment and Mrs. Johnson prepared to leave, Tom stood in front of his small garage and looked at the grant approval letter one more time. In just a few months, this place would be transformed. There would be new equipment, additional staff, and most importantly, young people learning skills that could change their lives. But as Tom folded the letter and put it in his pocket, he realized that the most important thing hadn't changed at all. Tomorrow morning, he would still be the same mechanic who stopped what he was doing to help people in need. And that, he thought, was exactly how it should be. David walked over as his mother got back in her car. Tom, thank you again for everything you did that night. Tom shook the young man's hand. Thank you for reminding me that sometimes the smallest actions can make the biggest difference. As the cars pulled away and Tom walked back into his garage, his phone buzzed with a text from Maria. The news crew called. They want to interview the family tonight. The girls are so excited their daddy is going to be on TV. Tom smiled and texted back. Tell them daddy's coming home early tonight. We have a lot to celebrate. For the first time in years, Tom Rodriguez felt like the future was full of endless possibilities.